Let me tell you my deepest, darkest secret. But if I tell you it, you'll be able to control me.
My name is Andrew Gold. I'm a British journalist and documentary maker and podcaster. I'm the host of the Heretics podcast, which looks at lots of, I suppose, the culture wars, perhaps from an anti-woke standpoint. I know that's the name anti-woke is now a bit sort of redundant and passé, but that's what it is. And I just wrote a book called The Psychology of Secrets, which has very little to do with that and is all about a mixture between psychology and secrecy and suppression in cults and authoritarian regimes, how people use secrets against you, how you can use secrets, and a mix of some of the journalistic stories that I've covered over the years with exorcists and other kinds of wacky and sometimes dangerous and scary characters.
It's a really fun book. It's a really thoughtful book. I'm working my way through it. I haven't been able to put it down. But as a podcaster, people have come to you with their secrets. Why do you think people are doing this?
I think it's a mixture of things. I think there's when you've got a secret, it eats at you, and I think there is potentially an evolutionary psychology aspect to it. You know, if you were encouraged by your body to tell secrets, if your body made it uninhabitable like a fever for the secrets that lie within you and you have to expel them, your tribe might have done better in the wild or whatever it might be. But of course, the other side to secret telling is you might face social ostracism if what you say shows that you have transgressed societal norms in some way. And so often it's better you don't tell anyone within your tribe. And what we have with a podcaster, for example, or maybe a hairdresser or a therapist, is this fairly novel position of what we call parasocial interaction, where it feels very much like the viewer has that same intimacy with the podcaster that they might with their friends and family, but without the negative risk that they might tell some of your friends and that you'll face that social ostracism or embarrassment or fear. So I think that's a big part of it.
So what is the deepest secret that anyone has told you? Is it the one that you start the book with?
No, it's probably the one from chapter 9. I'm always like, should I tell people? Do I not want to tell people? But I think I should, because like, if you find it interesting, you'll get the book. And I went to meet a couple who were both YouTube doesn't like when you use a certain words, and one of the words I use on my show so as not to use them is PDF files. These people who you find in playgrounds talking to children, that kind of thing. You can't say that word on YouTube, which is well, you can, but you'll be demonetized. These two people in chapter 9, this was when I was living in Germany. I've lived in quite a few different countries. I became obsessed with language learning. And while in each place, I tried to find bizarre subcultures to follow. So, for example, in Argentina, it was exorcism. And in Germany, it was this subject. And it took years of research. And I managed to find this couple who were 25 and 27, I think, at the time, who were both what they would call non-offending PDF files. So they rally against any kind of offense or whatever, but they'd never told any non-PDF file about this. And especially, definitely hadn't spoken to a journalist about this kind of thing. So I hopped on a train, went down to this small village in the north of Germany somewhere, and spent the day with the two of them, asking them all about their secrets. And it was just incredible because, the book that I've written posits that the most difficult kinds of secrets to keep would be ones that are very much wrapped up in your identity, which makes having that kind of attraction to children, of course, is going to be a really difficult one to keep. But I mean, also back in the day when it was illegal to be gay, Alan Turing is a really good example. That would have been just horrific to have to keep that secret. So one's involved with your identity, ones that of course could cause a level of social ostracism that could have you killed. Those are really difficult to keep. And they were obviously itching to talk about it. They were sort of relieved they found a journalist willing to listen to them without, trying to attack them or something. But they were also incredibly nervous, scared. They broke down in tears quite a few times while talking with me. It was a really, really, probably the strangest day of my life. But I'm happy I got to put that down in the book and maybe shed light on a really dark corner of our world.
I don't want to spoil the book, so I won't read from the chapter, but I will say that he gives a disclaimer at the start that it makes for disturbing reading, and it does indeed make for disturbing reading. He writes that it's maybe best if some secrets are left kept, and as you'll see throughout the rest of this podcast, I tend to agree. There's one aspect of the chapter that I found particularly interesting though. Gould talks about the struggle that these PDF files, as he has so carefully called them, go through. They feel that their, let's call it compulsion, is closely tied to their identity. And as he's pointed out, those are the hardest secrets to keep. But at the same time, revealing this secret has serious social consequences. This means that some of these people will do anything to feel better about themselves. One of these things is to fall down a dark online rabbit hole of like-minded people who can convince each other that they're not the problem, society is. Dark and obscure as this may sound, it reminded me of arguments that some activists actually make when they talk about abolishing the family. In one book, published by my own Sublation Press, Bulent Somai argues that we will overcome this problem when we remove all age-related prohibitions so that everyone will be able to practice their sexuality without prohibition and thus shame. After the 1960s, it became radical to say that sexuality is something common to everyone, regardless of age, and I can well imagine how, as Gould writes in the chapter, such ways out of cognitive dissonance can become, as he writes, very dangerous because it gives those who never intended to offend a free license to do so without feeling bad about their identity. Now, all that said, the chapter is called The Worst Secret in the World because it's a secret that attracts perhaps the most societal stigma. So I tend to think that people are panicking about nothing when they claim that it's the next sexual stigma that might be lifted. I can't imagine that this attraction will be the next symbol added to the progress flag, contrary to some posts that circulated online last year. Still, the fact that these arguments float around is probably enough for someone experiencing the anguish of such a horrifying proclivity to tell themselves they're just ahead of their time. In this way, it seems like a secret better left buried. But there are organizations, and Gould describes one in Germany, that offer a place where the secret can be divulged, and these people can receive therapies designed to stop them from offending. And Gould seems to suggest that more open conversations can help such people avoid falling down rabbit holes and convincing themselves it's fine to act on their desires. To find out whether or not it works and how or whether the couple Andrew describes here can be helped, you'll have to pick up the book. The other one that I was alluding to when I asked the question is the one that opens the book. And it struck me as interesting, first of all, because the person decided to disclose this to you without really knowing you very well. Or at least they felt that they knew you well because you were sort of beaming into their ears weekly.
That's right.
Yeah, had kind of disclosed it to you while she was in a public place. So I want to kind of go into some of the perils of that kind of positioning. But do you think it's that people feel a closeness to you because of who you are?
Yeah, I think it's a few things like that. I think I am fairly mild-mannered, and people maybe latch on to that. I share a lot of myself on the podcast. People have been listening for 4 or 5 years now, some people right from the beginning. Where they've heard me make jokes, they've heard me make self-deprecating jokes. They feel like I'm part of the furniture in their house. They've also seen that I've had all sorts of experiences. I mean, the podcast has become a little bit more into the sort of woke politics area now, or anti-woke, or whatever it is. But the first couple hundred episodes are not that way at all. It's just some of them are, and some of them are just extreme ideologues or people who have been through really hard times. People who were in Scientology, say, or had horrible experiences of Islam or Hasidic Judaism and things that happened to them. And they've seen that I've already dealt with those things in what I hope is a compassionate way. And so there is that, and there's the mix of that with this kind of parasocial interaction, which is this, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a sort of phenomenon that was maybe coined in the 60s, I think, around the idea of talk show hosts. People would watch the talk show hosts, and the good talk show hosts were the ones who could really make it seem like they were your friend and that they were talking through the screen to you. And in the last 10, 15, 20 years with the internet, we now have something that I don't even think has an official word, but I've gone with reciprocal parasocial interaction, because we're able to talk through that screen now, to comment on the comments and talk with people. So it really increases a sense of social cohesion between the podcaster and its audience, or their audience. And I think that all plays a role. Another point is I came to find that a big part is we think we tell our secrets to people who are polite, and we don't actually, because I am polite in some respects, but I also break a lot of society, social rules or norms. I think it's actually assertive people that we tell our secrets to. So again, a podcaster you listen to every week who's going out and making these interviews and giving his opinion or her opinion, that is an assertive person, and it's someone we might trust to do things with our secrets. So I think there's a big mix of that. This was a woman who, again, I don't mind giving bits away because it's the opening. It's the opening chapter, and she was down a dark alley somewhere, and a man attacked her, and she killed the man. And she explains in gruesome detail how she managed to do it. But my question, in addition to how did she actually do that, my question was, why me? You've never told this to anyone. We don't know each other well. I had met her once, I think, outside, or once or twice outside of whatever, just, because she works in the journalism industry and the media. But she also, it turned out, was a big listener to my podcast. And that was what led me to go into this book. Like, okay, what is it about me being a podcaster, or someone being a hairdresser, as I said before, or whatever it is that makes us tell our secrets, and how can we harness that and control that?
And the thing that worried me was, you opened the book with this. Were you worried that perhaps by giving the gruesome details, the woman might be, she literally never told a soul. And you found, I think, a newspaper clipping of of the actual event. Were you not worried that perhaps it was possible to identify her, that one of your readers might figure it out? Blue tick, well-to-do kind of woman now living in the city. But there were some identifying details there. Did that worry you, or did you change some of the details?
I think it was something we discussed with like the lawyers and everyone as well. So there's the ethical side of it. I would hate for her to be found out, even though it is a secret, I think, really, where nobody would blame her. But she doesn't want it told, and that's important. And I would always respect that. We spoke with the journalist. We changed quite a few details deliberately and mixed them up actually with a second relatively similar story, and showed this person and said, hey, because that's a big deal at the moment. We have the baby reindeer stuff.
This baby reindeer thing globally has been one of the biggest things I've ever been involved in. And I think it's when you watch the series, it's gripping television. Mm-hmm. Richard Gadd, I saw him on your show here. He's done an amazing job telling this story. Sure. But the key question, after watching the series and watching my interview, is it actually a true story?
It's really interesting, because what Richard has said is that he didn't want their identities revealed. That wasn't what the show was about. But inevitably, of course, because it's been huge.
I've got to say, I'm afraid I think that's pretty disingenuous, because they literally used parts of messages which internet sleuths just tapped into her Twitter account, and up came the same phraseology.
For anyone who's been following that, the Netflix series about a stalker who follows this man around, and then that person was very easily discoverable, the apparent stalker, and she's come out and said she's suing Netflix now, and and understandably so, if that's and apparently a lot of the stuff in the series was made up. So I made sure to change as much as possible, make it not really recognizable. I couldn't now, this is years after she told me, I couldn't find this news story anywhere anymore. So she was satisfied and I was satisfied. But that does speak to another point, which is that when you tell people your secret, firstly, no one keeps your secret. Like, when I say no one, I'm generalizing, but relatively nobody. Like, if you want your secret kept, don't tell it to anyone. Like, and they found in studies that the closer the person is to you, that bears no, that doesn't affect at all how likely they are to keep it. Like, your best friend and a really important secret, they are no more likely to keep it than anyone else is. So, but what you are doing is you are putting a burden on that person, because we all want to tell We all want to tell the secrets. And depending on what it is, depending on how much it might affect your identity and your inner circles, it might be difficult then for you to keep the secrets of others. Which was that the name of that German film, The Secrets of Others, or The Lives of Others, which is a similar kind of thing. Everybody had to keep secrets from one another with the Stasi and everything. And it's very stressful. Obviously, one or two small secrets is not going to cause too much stress. But when you are a podcaster and you find yourself this keeper of everybody's secrets suddenly, it can start to feel a little bit stressful.
This is the interesting thing about secrets, that it can be cathartic to reveal them to people. But there's also another kind of school of thought that has been challenging that. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, that there's this, like, I'm a sociologist, right? So I have to, when I do research with human subjects, I have to go through a long process of ethical evaluation. And inevitably, regardless of how unsensitive the subject matter is, I have to put, like, here's a hotline to call in case you want to talk to somebody, and you have to have a debrief sheet afterward and so on. And there's a lot of criticism of this, that actually it doesn't really help that much to debrief somebody, to talk about things. It kind of puts the idea in somebody's head, oh, well, whatever I said here is going to hurt me. And we have an idea in our culture that of, like, repression is bad for you. Like, if you don't tell things, you are repressing it and it's going to come out in another way. But in other cultures, bad things happen, they just leave them behind, or they do like a ritual in the community or something that puts it away. And, in a disaster scenario, there's often psychologists that will go and work with people in these in affected areas. And the people are like, what are these people doing? They want me to sit here and talk about things? I don't want to talk about it. So what do you think about that kind of critique that says actually divulging forces you to kind of live in the past, that maybe it's okay to leave the past behind you?
That's really interesting. Yeah, and it certainly would, I think, as you're alluding to, that'd be quite controversial to say in certain circles. I think we increasingly, hence my podcast on sort of anti-woke thing. We increasingly have this divide between people who believe it's better to, coddle the American Mind? Was that Haidt's book, The Coddling of the American? As if so much American exceptionalism. We all have minds as well, and they work in similar ways, and we have similar coddling, but the coddling of the American mind. But I suppose that can speak for all of us. We have very similar, habits in the UK and traits and things. So it seems like half the world want to do that, and I have a lot of time and patience and respect for that, because it's this idea that there are sometimes times where we need to look at things and help people. There are examples in the book where, there's Madeline Black, who was somebody who was attacked by two men sexually when she was a kid. And she was an absolute mess, didn't tell anybody for about 50 years. And it was only when she was like in her 50s that she began talking about it. I think there's definitely... firstly, we go too far with that. There's different personalities, and there are definitely some people who are like, a bad thing happened to me and I don't really care, I'm moving on with it. And I think there's a lot to be said for that actually making people stronger as well. There's also a bit of a myth around, like, just talk about things and that's enough and that's it. And that's not really going to do very much, I think. There was this big fashion, for example, towards primal scream in the 80s. John Lennon, Yoko Ono were really involved in it. They loved it. It was just a bunch of, like, just screaming stuff. And the idea was you're just screaming out everything. You're just getting it all out. And of course, there's a bit of placebo there, and you feel a bit better afterwards. But it doesn't actually change anything in the narrative in your mind. It doesn't reframe things. So after a few years, all of that primal scream stuff was just discarded because it's just nonsense. I still see that, I talked of exorcism before. Exorcism's a really similar thing where you've got 17-year-old girls, a lot of them, they tend to be 17-year-old girls. That's what we see at the moment in the, I'm going to say a controversial thing, but in the trans situation, it's a lot of sort of 16 to 18-year-old girls who feel very out of control, don't know what they can do with their bodies. They feel like people are looking at them all the time. Something doesn't feel right inside of me. And so in Argentina, where I used to live, well, if those are your symptoms, then you have a demon inside you. Obviously not in the modern city centres, but out in the suburbs. And that's how they deal with it. In Western society, it's that you have a gendered soul inside of you. in any case, it's the idea of just sort of shout things out into the open, especially with exorcism, shout everything and then you'll be better. And they tend to be better and feel better for quite a few months, maybe even a year, but eventually the same nagging issues are going to come back. So it does feel very much like the best results are achieved when you get stuff out, but you also have somebody with you to sort of bounce ideas off of and try to reframe whatever might have happened to you in the past. So yes, reveal your secrets, but not all the time, not to an unwilling listener, not to people who are going to tell them to other people, not to those who are just going to judge you or not really help you in any way to reframe the narrative, and not if it's going to make your situation worse. If you're dealing okay with keeping the secret, why reveal it? It makes no sense. It's only if this thing they call the fever model, which is very much like how a fever makes your body uninhabitable for the virus, but also for you. This seems to happen with secret keeping. You look at literature throughout time, this has been the case. Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment was very much that. You know, he had this big secret when he murdered. That's not a spoiler. It was very early in the book for anyone listening. But he has this big secret and it starts to eat at him. Oscar Wilde always talks about secrets gnawing at him. A lot of people feel that way. And that's when it's like, okay, I need to weigh up to what extent is this going to continue to gnaw at me and ruin my life? And to what extent does revealing it actually make things worse for me? And I have to weigh them up and make a decision based on those factors.
Going back to the subtitle of the book, it's Murderers, Cults, and Influencers. One of these things is not like the other one. Why influencers?
Murderers is not like the other two.
So today's case is centered around a 27-year-old girl named Miranda Wilking Derrick. She's a very well-known dancer, choreographer, and also a social media influencer. Now, her sister Melanie also shared interest in dance ever since she was young, and she is extremely talented. So the two of them together made a joint TikTok account where they would both dance, they would both share dances, all sorts of things like that.
Hey, Wilkings and Queens, we're the Wilking sisters, and welcome back to another episode of What's Next?
Wilking sisters are probably some of the most exciting dancers that you have on TikTok, right?
But this episode is actually going to be focusing on how certain influencers became what some people believe is a full-blown cult. Again, allegedly. And you may have heard people refer to it as the 7M TikTok cult.
Miranda is a part of a religious group, and she's not allowed to speak to us.
In Chapter 7 of Andrew Gould's Psychology of Secrets, he makes the point that being fooled into joining a cult is easier than most people think. And not only can intelligent people fall for it, they may be even more likely to do so, because they're less likely to take advice from others or see their own cognitive biases. If you still think you'd never fall for a cult, consider that the promises cults offer to people are often related to status or financial. Picture this: you're at a low point in your life, or success seems tantalizingly close, and someone comes along and offers you a push. But not only this, they offer you a sense of purpose and meaning along with success, both worldly and otherwise.
I understand why they like it. And I understand, like, I feel like
and especially
their structure
now with the careers.
Yeah,
and like everything is
they're
growing.
so talented and they're growing and it's amazing. So now you can just see how they would stay even more.
Secrets, Gould continues, are central to cults. For one thing, information about the cult and its belief system is often kept under wraps. Even as a cult member, you only gradually come to understand what it's all about as you move up the ranks. Secrets are also used against cult members. They're often forced to divulge embarrassing things about themselves, their family members, even their own children. This is used as collateral to keep them under control. Cults use secrecy, secret knowledge that only they have access to, which makes them more privy and privileged than others. Secret knowledge is also one of the principal creators of status. The cult members are righteous, and outsiders are not. The higher cult members are the most righteous, leading to demands for deference and desire to achieve higher status within the organization, to become privy to its secrets.
And she's like, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to make a mistake. I'm just learning. So whatever she's involved in, she's got some kind of control over her that is making her afraid of something. Anybody that knows her knows the kind of person she was. And if you ever asked what is the most important thing in life? She would say her family. So to cut everybody off, you have to go back and say, if you were willing to cut everybody off, if this is your decision, who altered your thinking for that to be something you would want?
Someone asked, how did she get involved in this group? And it was, again,
Teachings,
something, but there is also dancers, and there's
videos.
also finding out you have to be invited. And this is a religious organization that's
Gated.
Influencers, because I did a lot of YouTubing, obviously, as a YouTuber, and I'm just, as a journalist, this book is really a sort of gonzo journalist book, which is what I always wanted to write. Those are the books I grew up reading, and just going on adventures and meeting strange, weird subcultures and trying to get into their heads. That's what fascinates me. That's where my passion lies. But I find that it becomes more profound if you can also tie that in with some sort of psychological phenomenon, such as secrets, which hadn't been that well explored. So that's why secrets. But really, cults, subcultures, all of extreme ideologies, why we think the way we do. And I just think if I'm going to be looking at cults, if I'm going to be looking at murderers, if I'm going to be looking at all these strange kinds of things, well, being a YouTuber or being any kind of influencer is a really strange thing. And I was joking when I said murderers is the odd one out of those three. But if I think about it, you could argue that influencers is more similar to cults than either of those two are to murderers. Neither of those people are murdering. They're not even necessarily forces for bad. I don't think cults are necessary. I think of cults personally. I know everyone has a different idea on this. I loved Amanda Montell's book, Cultish, and I love the idea of cults being an ish or on a spectrum. And so maybe a 10 out of 10 is Heaven's Gate or Jonestown or Scientology. And maybe a 2 out of 10 is your local book club, where you feel like maybe I can't say what I really think of this book because everybody's going to judge me. And I now don't have any other friends. So I've sort of pushed them away and I'm not supposed to hang out with them. And I'm in this little culty book group. Well, it's a 2 out of 10. It's not going to ruin your life and it might actually be good for you. Influencers, I was doing a course on YouTube, as in how to be a YouTuber when I was just starting out a few years ago. And it was really good. I think it's called Video Creators, and I think they've now banded together with something called vidIQ, and they all sort of do it together now. It's this Mormon guy, and it was great. But the thing was, I think what he really wanted to rattle home to people that were taking the course was stop trying to think of it, as a lot of people do, as like, SEO and putting the right words in the right places and tricking people sort of with computery language to watch the videos. And he was basically saying, you got to think of your YouTube as you would any business. And I started to think of that as any cult or any community. You have to find a way that anyone who sees your thumbnail and your title can't skip past it compared to the 20 or 30 others, where they are in a psychological position of, I have to click on Andrew's or Ashley's video. I can't click on any other ones. And then you have to make your videos in a way that makes them keep watching it, which is, it's simple. But the first step is think about who your audience is, as any business should, and how can you define what your channel is in a very short, direct and simple line. Just, this is what my channel is, this is the audience, this is who I'm selling to. Well, it's a business like any other. But the more I did this course, you get to, it's like a lesson per day. And we got to a point where the lessons started to really resemble what I would see as cult leadership. So stuff like icons. So I've got this blue light behind me. If anyone's listening, there's a blue light behind me. There's a yellow light on the other side when it's a wide screen. So people know that's my setup. Rituals. So I think it's awakening wonders. Is that what Russell Brand says? Hello, my awakening wonders. And he puts his arms up all over the screen. It's the ritual of Russell Brand. And people start to have words that only their followers would know and understand. And it builds up this psychological bond. Again, the parasocial interaction. And some of the stuff was like non-believers. You have to have non-believers. I started YouTubing. I was co-hosting with my friend Sean Atwood. Now, Sean's a really interesting character, but he has like nearly 1 million subscribers, and he was an ecstasy smuggler who's from Liverpool. He was a stockbroker, became really rich, ended up in America, and got involved with the mafia, went to prison for 5 years in Arizona, Arizona's deadliest prison or something like that. And while he was there, he started reading. A lot of it, I think, is conspiracy theories, and we have these arguments, but a lot of it is also just, philosophy and things like that. And when he got out, he had some notoriety, moved back to the UK, started his YouTube channel. And it is all a little bit more on the sort of conspiracy, true crime side to what I tend to do. But I was co-hosting with him on his show, and it was great. And I saw how he, I think without realizing, just did these traits that I was reading about. So non-believers would be what he would call the podcast wars. There are podcast wars going on. And that was him having these fights with other podcasters in a similar genre that everybody knew about who was following him. And that's, again, everybody has to pick a side then. And it also just builds them both up. He wasn't even doing it consciously. He just felt like he was in the podcast wars. If ever the internet connection went down on a live stream, he would start saying, "Oh, they're trying to get us. They're bringing us down from the outside." Again, and we're offline, and I'm saying, "Sean, you don't really believe that." He's like, "Yes, I do. Absolutely. I've seen it. I spoke to my internet provider. They said this is happening." So I'm like, okay, now I don't know what to believe. But in any case, he was, I think, just very naturally, it's what makes him such a good YouTuber, just building what I would call a cult following. Now, later in the book, towards the end, I go more into the influences. And, the thing that interests me so much about cults is they can make humans just do the most awful things. And we know throughout history that humans do awful things. I think if we're ever in a society or a group or a cult that allows us to do awful things, we do the awful things. If we live in a country or a world where slavery is acceptable, we do it. If we live in a world where you can round up Jews and put them in a whatever, we do it. We do the worst thing, providing that our peers and everyone around us allows us to do it and congratulates us for doing it. And that's a really interesting thought. And then you can look at some of the things the Scientologists have done over the years. I know loads of ex-Scientologists now who tell me nothing would have convinced them they were wrong. Nothing. And some of the things they've done to their own children in the name of this higher goal just shows me that humans will do awful things. That brought me on to look at not just my own YouTube, but to look at YouTubers like sharenters. Now, sharenters are parents who share. Sharing and parenting, sharenters. And those are the ones you see on YouTube and Instagram. They've got their kids and whatever they're doing. And I started following one in particular I was looking at who, and I can't remember their name now, but it's in the book. And they got to a point where I think their views were going down. It was, and that's a really stressful thing for anybody who's in this sort of cultish mindset, and everybody's love bombing them from the sides. You're brilliant, you're amazing, but the views are going down. Suddenly they've got this whole team, and they're trying to pay for them, and they don't know what's going on. What can we do? Because the kids everyone was there to watch are now growing up. The kid's now 13. People were there like, I don't know, they want to watch this 5-year-old. Now they're watching a 13-year-old. What do? And they ended up doing what I think is just morally reprehensible, but understandable from a cult angle.
In part 2, we discuss just how far some influencers are willing to go to create and maintain their cult-like following, and the tricky relationship between keeping secrets and just being a private person. Can a demand for openness be just as controlling as secrecy? Visit www.patreon.com/Ashley A. Frawley.